Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're taking a close look at the 10th episode of NZLankaNews English.
This week's roundup is quite something, a real mix of topics.
It is. We'll try to hit the highlights for you. Let's kick things off with the ACC levies for those EV owners out there.
Oh, right. The news that those are set to double by 2027.
Yeah, from like, what, $42 now to over $122? Seems like a pretty big jump.
It is significant, but I think, it's a sign of the times, really. EVs are becoming more common,
Yeah,
less need for those incentives as they become, well, more mainstream.
makes sense.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, will it actually make people think twice about going electric?
That's the question, isn't it?
I mean, fuel prices are always going up and down, and then there's the whole, environmental thing.
Right. And on that point, most economists don't think the levy will have a massive impact.
Hmm.
Those other factors you mentioned are probably the bigger drivers, saving money on fuel and, well, wanting to be a bit greener.
Yeah, true. Okay, well, speaking of energy, this next story is an interesting one. Microsoft is launching a data center here.
Their first hyperscale data center in New Zealand.
Yep. And they're not alone, are they?
Not at all. CDC is already here, and, Amazon Web Services, they're coming too.
It's like everyone's getting in on the action.
It is rather fascinating. All driven by the demand for computing power, the whole AI boom.
Oh, totally. And it's amazing how much energy all that uses. Like, did you know a single ChatGPT query?
Uses almost 10 times the energy of a regular Google search.
Yeah, 10 times.
It's a bit mind-blowing when you think about it.
It is, and kind of makes you think, right, about the hidden costs of all this amazing technology.
Absolutely. These data centers, they need a lot of energy, and as demand grows, so does their environmental impact.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Embracing all this cool new stuff, but also having to deal with the consequences.
It is a challenge, but it's good to see some companies taking steps in the right direction.
All right.
Like Microsoft, they're using all renewable energy for this new center, and they're working with Contact Energy to look into using geothermal power.
That's pretty impressive.
And they're also doing some interesting things with water-free cooling systems.
Wow. It does make you wonder, though, can all that really offset, how much energy AI is using?
That's the big question. Is this green AI really sustainable, or are we just, putting a Band-Aid on a bigger problem?
I don't know. Maybe a bit of both. Okay, well, let's move on to something a bit more urgent. The fire risk in Canterbury.
Yes, that's definitely a concern. With these hot and windy conditions.
We've already had some pretty serious fires near Bridge Hill, Currawee, West Melton, Burnham.
Hundreds of hectares have already burned. It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can get out of control.
Yeah, so what can we do to stay safe? Besides, the obvious, like not lighting any fires.
Right. Well, for one, check those fire permits, make sure they're valid and that you're following all the conditions.
Okay, good point.
And just be really careful with anything that could, well, cause a spark. Like if you're doing any grinding or mowing, be extra cautious. And of course, if you've had any fires in the past, keep an eye on those areas. Embers can smolder for ages.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess it's worth saying, if you see any signs of fire, even a little one.
Call 111 immediately. Don't wait.
Absolutely. Better safe than sorry. Now, for something a bit more positive, there's a new tool for farmers to measure emissions.
Oh, yes. That standardized emissions measurement tool. It could be a real game changer.
It sounds like it'll really help them manage and reduce those greenhouse gas emissions,
With
right?
that goal, to give them a clear and consistent way to track their emissions.
It's something they've been asking for, right?
Absolutely. And it uses data they already collect, aligns with existing calculators. And the best part, it'll be regularly updated.
So they're not stuck with outdated information.
Exactly. Keeping up with the latest science and technology.
Okay, well, that sounds promising. I do wonder, though, what kind of impact could this have on, well, how people view New Zealand's agricultural industry?
That's a great question. I mean, we're known for our farming, but it's also been under scrutiny, right, for its environmental impact.
Exactly.
So this tool, it could be a big step towards proving that we're serious about sustainable farming practices. It might even affect food prices. If people are willing to pay a bit more for products that are, well, from farms actively cutting their emissions.
Interesting. It really shows you how everything's connected, doesn't it? From technology to, like, what we choose to buy at the supermarket.
It's all part of a big, complex system.
Okay, so on the topic of connections, New Zealand and Thailand, they're planning to upgrade their relationship to a strategic partnership.
Yeah.
by 2026.
That's right. It just goes to show how important regional cooperation is becoming, especially in areas like trade, climate change, security, and just working together for everyone's benefit.
It's interesting how this news fits in with all the global stuff we've been talking about.
Mhm.
Technology, energy, sustainability, international relations. It seems like everything's more and more connected these days.
It's definitely the reality of our world today, globalized more than ever before, and these kinds of partnerships are going to be key to navigating all the complexities.
For sure. Okay, well, this next topic is always a bit of a hot button issue. Social media access for young people.
Ah, yes.
A recent poll showed that 68% of New Zealanders actually support restricting access for those under 16.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because it aligns with what Australia is doing.
They just passed a law, right?
Yeah. It'll come into effect in late 2025. It's a tricky issue, though. A lot to consider.
I mean, you can't deny that social media can have a negative impact on mental health, especially for teenagers. They're still figuring things out, dealing with so much pressure.
Of course. But then there's the question of how you actually enforce these restrictions, right? And whether it's, stepping on young people's freedom of expression, limiting their access to information, it's a delicate balancing act.
It is. And it makes you wonder, how would it really affect their social lives, their ability to stay informed, stay connected? I mean, so much of their world is online.
Absolutely. It's a valid concern, trying to protect them from the downsides of social media, but also potentially isolating them or cutting them off from valuable resources.
It's a tough one. No easy answers. It seems like every solution has its own set of problems.
That's the thing with complex social issues. There are no simple solutions. We have to weigh the pros and cons, be willing to adapt, and, well, keep learning as we go.
For sure. Oh, this next one made me laugh. The government is reviewing those outdated regulations for hairdressers.
Oh, yes. Regulations that just haven't kept up with the times. A classic.
Some of the rules are so bizarre. Like, do you know it's against the rules to serve coffee in a salon?
Really?
Yep. Or to have a dog there.
Well, that does seem a little absurd.
Right. It seems like this review is all about getting rid of unnecessary burdens on businesses and, well, modernizing the rules to reflect, what actually happens in salons today.
Makes sense.
I mean, imagine getting your hair done while enjoying a nice latte with your furry friend by your side.
Now that's a relaxing experience.
Right. I think it just shows that we need to constantly reevaluate our rules and regulations, make sure they're actually, working for everyone.
I agree.
Okay, well, let's talk about something that could affect your work life. There are some changes coming to employment laws in New Zealand over the next few years.
Oh, right. Quite a few changes on the horizon. It's important to keep up with them.
They cover a whole range of issues. It's a big shift in the employment landscape, you could say.
It is, and it's important for both employers and employees to understand what it all means.
Yeah. One that stands out is the income threshold for unjustified dismissal claims.
Right, that's a big one. So basically, claims will only be possible if you're earning under $180,000 a year.
So like those high salary roles.
Exactly. It's meant to give employers more flexibility, for those high impact roles where the stakes are higher.
I could see that. But it does make you wonder, is it really fair? Could it disadvantage certain workers?
That's definitely a valid point. It could create a two-tier system, where higher earners have fewer protections. So it'll be important to track how this plays out. Make sure it's not having unintended consequences.
Yeah, good point. Seems like a complicated issue. Benefits and drawbacks for both sides. And this is just one of the changes on the way. We'll have to dive deeper into all this after a quick break.
We will. There's a lot more to unpack. We'll explore these changes in more detail and consider what it all means for the future of work in New Zealand when we come back.
Right, so we were talking about those employment law changes, and there are a few more worth mentioning.
Yeah, there's that reduction in personal grievance payouts for cases where an employee has done something wrong, right?
That's the one. The idea is to make sure payouts are, well, fair, proportionate to the actual harm, and, to discourage those frivolous claims.
Right. So, trying to strike a balance. Protect employees, but also prevent too many lawsuits.
I imagine that's a bit of a hot topic.
It can be, yeah. And then there's the return of pay deductions for those partial strikes.
Oh, right, that one.
Yeah, another one that can be a bit controversial. So if employees take part in, a partial work stoppage.
Not a full strike.
Right, not a full strike. Employers can actually deduct wages for that time. Those in favor say it's about preventing disruption, but critics worry it could, make things worse, lead to bigger conflicts.
Undermine workers' rights, they'd say.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance, isn't it? Making sure both sides feel like they're being heard and treated fairly.
Definitely. And then there's that whole Holidays Act reform. It's been on the cards for a while.
It has. That act, it's a bit of a mess, to be honest.
Yeah, a lot of people find it really confusing.
It is. So the goal is to make it, well, simpler. How leave accrues and potentially moving to an hours-based model to better reflect how people work these days.
But some people are worried that could be a disadvantage to those with, less predictable hours or who really rely on that leave
That's right. It's all part of how work is changing, really.
with the gig economy and everything.
Exactly. More flexible work arrangements. It challenges those traditional employment models. So these changes, they're trying to adapt the laws to that reality. But it's important to do it carefully, right? We don't want to erode workers' rights or create unnecessary burdens for employers.
Definitely a lot to think about there. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out in the real world.
It will. Okay, so let's shift gears for a moment. Let's talk about property.
Always an interesting topic.
It is. And in 2024, we've seen some pretty incredible figures, especially in
The
Auckland.
gap between, the cheapest and most expensive places just seems to be growing wider and wider.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, the cheapest property sold in Auckland this year was an apartment in Mount Albert.
Oh, yeah.
Went for just $50,000.
Wow, that's pretty cheap.
There was a reason for that, though. It came with an $80,000 repair bill. Leaky building issues.
Ah, right. So not such a bargain after all. What about at the other end of the scale?
Well, the most expensive home that sold this year, a mansion on Paratai Drive in Orakai, went for a cool $21.84 million.
Wow. And a close second.
$20 million for a place in Remuera.
It's almost hard to believe those kinds of properties exist in the same city as that, $50,000 apartment.
It just goes to show the reality of things, doesn't it? Wealth disparity, and how tough it can be to afford a place in a city like Auckland.
Yeah. Okay, so what about renting? Any interesting trends there?
We are seeing some shifts. Nukaho in Taupo saw the biggest rent increase.
Really?
Yep, up by 27.7%.
That's a lot. Why is that happening there?
It seems to be a combination of things. More people moving out of the big cities, not enough rentals. And, well, the cost of living in general is going up.
Makes sense. So where are rents going down?
Actually, Kawero saw the biggest drop,
Oh, interesting.
down by 9.1%. Likely due to a few factors, fewer people living there, fewer jobs, and more rentals available than people who need them.
So it really is a mixed bag out there. Up in some places, down in others.
The property market is always a bit of a roller coaster, prices and rents going up and down depending on so many different things.
It's hard to keep up sometimes.
Right?
Okay, well, this next one might surprise you. It's about cash.
Cash!
Physical money. I thought we were all going digital.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But get this, a Reserve Bank consultation found that 84% of people are actually worried about losing access to cash.
Wow, really? That many? Why are people so attached to it?
Well, a lot of people like that it's private, that it's
Yeah.
easy to use for certain things, and they worry about what happens if everything's digital.
Like what?
Data breaches, or if the technology fails. And what about those who can't use digital payments? Will they be left behind?
That's a good point. So does this mean the Reserve Bank is giving up on that whole digital currency idea?
Not exactly. They've said cash will be around as long as people want it. But they are still looking into a central digital currency for the future.
So how would that work?
It would be like a digital version of our dollars, issued by the Reserve Bank, like physical cash but online. It could have some cool features like offline payments, instant transactions.
But wouldn't that raise concerns about privacy? I mean, even more than we have now.
Of course. And the Reserve Bank has said that any digital currency would have strong privacy protections built in, and, it wouldn't be about replacing cash completely.
It's interesting, isn't it, how we have all these different ways of paying for things these days. Makes you wonder what it'll be like in the future.
It does. Okay, well, let's head back to Middle-earth for a moment.
Middle Earth. Now you're talking. What's happening there?
A new Lord of the Rings film is coming out,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a bit different. It's an anime.
An anime. Wow, okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's called Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim. And it's set long before the original story, like 183 years before. It's all about the history of Rohan, the Horse Lords, and the events that led to, Helm's Deep being built.
I'm a big fan of The Lord of the Rings, so I'm always up for a new story.
They've even got Miranda Otto back to narrate it as Owen.
Oh, that's cool. And who's the voice of Helm Hammerhand?
Brian Cox, he brings a real gravitas to the role.
Well, I have to say, I'm not sure about the whole anime thing, but I'm curious to see how they've done it.
It's definitely a bold choice, but it might attract a whole new audience to the story, right?
True. I guess it's all about finding new ways to tell these classic stories. Keep them fresh for new generations.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of keeping things up to date, the government is finally updating that relationships and sexuality education curriculum.
Well, the RSE. Yeah, it's been a while.
Almost 2 decades, actually. And there were some pretty big gaps in the old one.
Yeah, it was a bit outdated.
The Education Review Office, they did a report, and it found a lot of inconsistency in how it was being taught. And, not enough focus on important things like consent, healthy relationships, staying safe online.
So what's changing?
The new curriculum will lay it all out,
Right.
what should be taught and when, make sure young people are getting good information. It's about relationships, sexuality, and just, looking after themselves.
It sounds like a positive step.
Yeah.
Making sure they have the knowledge to make good decisions, stay safe.
Exactly. And it just shows how important education is for dealing with these big, complex issues.
Yeah.
And creating a culture where everyone feels respected and understood.
I agree. Okay, well, let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention. Fighting corruption.
Oh, yes. It was International Anti-Corruption Day recently, and the message was clear. Young people have a big role to play
In speaking up about it.
in demanding transparency, accountability. It's their future, right? They have a stake in creating a world that's fair and just.
But isn't New Zealand pretty good when it comes to corruption? I mean, we have a good reputation.
We do. But even here, Transparency International says we're not immune.
Oh, really? What are they concerned about?
Scams, for one. They're costing us billions. And there are weaknesses in, how political funding is handled, lobbying, media accountability.
So there's always room for improvement, even when you think you're doing well.
Exactly. Transparency International is calling for some concrete actions, like a register for beneficial ownership, and more joined-up strategies to, strengthen our systems and prevent exploitation.
So it's a reminder to be vigilant, not take things for granted.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's move on to a topic that's been making waves, literally. The Cook Strait ferries.
Ah, yes, the ferries. Always a topic of conversation.
It is. So after that last ferry project was scrapped,
It's a $3 billion one.
that's the one, the government has finally announced plans for 2 new ferries.
Okay, good news. When will they be ready?
Not until 2029, and there's some debate about whether they'll be, rail-enabled. Oh, right, so they could carry trains.
Exactly. Critics say not having that capability will make them less efficient for freight.
And miss out on a chance to make our transport system more integrated, more sustainable.
That's their argument. And, another big question is cost. They haven't released any figures yet.
I bet that's making some people nervous.
It is. And to, try to avoid the problems of past, they've put Winston Peters in charge of a new oversight company.
Winston Peters. Interesting choice. Does he have any experience with ferries?
Not directly, no. But he's known for being careful with money and, getting things done.
Yeah, so we'll see how it goes. It's a big project for the country. Important that they get it right this time.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have electric vehicles, AI, fire safety, international relations, even the future of our ferries.
It's been quite a tour of current events.
It has. So as we wrap up this look at the 10th episode of NZLankaNews English, I'm curious, what really stood out for you from all this? It's hard to pick just one thing. But I think what strikes me is that, change is a big theme here.
Yeah, I see that too. Technology changing so fast. How we live and work is changing. The political landscape is changing.
And to deal with all that change, we need to be informed, be adaptable, open to new ways of thinking.
Absolutely. Be willing to challenge our own assumptions, embrace new ideas, and work together.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, stay curious. It's amazing how much we've managed to cover today.
From EVs and AI to, the future of money and even Lord of the Rings anime.
It really has been a bit of a whirlwind tour.
It has.
And I keep thinking about this idea of everything being connected, How all these different stories kind of link together.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme, isn't it?
Like how technology changes how we live, how global events impact us here, how things that seem completely separate, like energy and social media, are actually all related.
Right.
It's like we can't look at these things in isolation anymore.
No, we have to think about the bigger picture.
The ripple effects, the the unintended consequences.
Exactly. A more holistic way of seeing things.
It makes you wonder, what skills do we need to navigate all this?
Yeah.
The world's getting pretty complex.
I think adaptability is crucial these days.
Being able to change direction when you need to.
Right. Being comfortable with not knowing everything and being willing to learn new things.
And being resilient, right?
Oh, definitely.
Because there are going to be challenges, setbacks, unexpected things happening all the time.
It's about bouncing back, learning from those mistakes.
And I think, most importantly, staying curious.
Yes.
Wanting to learn, wanting to understand different points of view.
Exactly.
Being open to new possibilities, questioning our assumptions, having those conversations with people who might see things differently.
Those conversations are where real understanding comes from, I think.
Couldn't agree more.
So, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into this 10th episode of NZLankaNews English.
It's been a fascinating look at what's happening in the world and the bigger trends that are shaping our future.
We hope you've enjoyed it and maybe even come away with some new things to think about.
Keep exploring, keep those conversations going, and most importantly, stay curious.
Until next time.
Thanks for joining us.